We are recording on Tuesday, November 25th, 2025 at 10:03 a.m. Eastern Time with Mr. Jim Kunstler, Donnie Bruno, and Ian Burlingame. And as I was just saying to you guys, I've known Jim since I think 2021, EM since last year, Donnie since 6 months ago. And I wanted to do an episode with you guys because uh, Don, I think you brought up last time, it just, in whatever which way, the podcast goes, there's never any form or function to it. You brought up, you're like, Jim Conser made a good point about, architecture and sort of like the brutalism that came out of the guys that survived World War One. And, my first thought was like, I think that's the first episode you and I ever did, Jim, was kind of about, architecture, the sprawl, and how that epoch is sort of coming to an end. And I know that's kind of one of the more interesting things that you're very good at. And so I just thought, well, let's put this thing together as a show. So everybody listening, go in the description, you can find the links to all the good stuff. But Don, could you please make that point again, and then we'll let Jim run with it?
Sure. So I think we were talking about just the way that our lived environment looks, and I had a memory flash into my head. Jim, you were talking to someone on your podcast years ago about how a lot of the early brutalist architects were all World War One vets, and how kind of like our lived environment ended up being this crazy expression of a bunch of guys with PTSD trying to cope with what they went through, and we're all living in the middle of it.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I can expand on that. It's that was the point, and
That's the show. All right, guys. Thanks for
right
watching,
there.
everybody. Do you
Well,
meet everybody? We'll fuck off now.
it was, these guys were coming out of an amazing industrial slaughter that astounded Western civilization and really traumatized it. And you saw the effects of it just resound through the whole 20th century. It took over all the art movements and made them kind of schizophrenic. And architecture was one of them. And you combine that also with the technological improvements that were happening at the time. For example, it wasn't until really the late 19th century, the early 20th century, that Western Civ had recovered the technological knowledge that the Romans had for using concrete. And so you start to get this revolution in building with cement and reinforced cement with with rebar and iron rods and stuff. And that really changes the way you can construct a building. And all of a sudden, many new forms are coming onto the scene. Some of them borrowed from elsewhere. For example, the early modernists had an infatuation with things like grain elevators. If you look at some of the literature of the post World War One period, you have characters like Corbusier having orgasms over photographs of the grain elevators of Buffalo, New York, because they were such massive structures and they were so impressive, and they kind of wanted to build buildings for humans as impressive as the grain elevators of Buffalo. And so what that kind of points to is a form of techno-narcissism that I don't know if it begins to come along, but it really accelerates in the architecture field. And it only got worse and worse until the situation today, which we can probably talk about later.
So if I might add a little something to that, Jim, at the same time, we moved from humanism, which died in the trenches of World War One, to financialism. And in the financiers, why put money into the little touches, the beauty touches of a building that costs more, when you can just fake that in a narrative about how glorious the building is with all these new technologies and all these. And now you save the money because the narrative is vastly costlier than all the little nuanced, subtle touches.
Well, I don't know that that's really true until really the post-World War II period, because in before that, you have other ideological things going on. And it starts with the Viennese architect Adolf Loos, Loos, who, in a turn of the century paper essay, declared that architectural ornament was a crime. And that was the beginning of a kind of thrust to erasing not just historicism in architecture, which had ruled, before 1900, and going into the 20th century. You get this revival of every conceivable architectural style and mode that was ever thought up, and you get railroad Romanesque and neo-medievalism and neoclassicism, Greco-Roman architecture, and they're all there's this battle for historic styles. I think it's even called that, the
But
battle.
that had peaked in the late 1800s, hadn't it?
Well,
Early
it didn't
1900s?
stop. It didn't stop. And in America, it was really given an afterburn by the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago,
So,
which was a massive demonstration of neoclassical superiority, in theory. And part of the reason for that was politically ideological, and namely a statement that the United States had finally emerged on the world stage as a great world power, perhaps the greatest, and that needed to be demonstrated in the way we presented our cities to the public. And our cities were not such wonderful places in the late 19th century. They had basically grown up in tandem with industrialism and all of its obnoxious practices, especially the pollution that was produced, the noise, the congestion, the tenements to house the increasing number of workers that were required to run these factories in places like New York. And that, of course, led to another parallel movement, which was the zoning movement, which starts in the early 20th century. And the idea with the zoning is you're going to segregate the cities by their uses. So all of the obnoxious industrial things are now in a zone that's special for them, and the residential zones are special, and they have to be kept away from the industrial stuff. And that movement for zoning actually elaborates itself until it flies up its own bunghole after the Second World War, and we decide that we make a collective consensus decision that shopping is an obnoxious activity that must be kept away from the places where people live. And so you get the extreme segregation of uses that you see in suburbia, post-war American suburbia. But getting back to the architects, so Adolf Loos declares that architecture is a crime. And meanwhile, you have this infatuation with industrial buildings and the new industrial technologies that can produce these things, namely reinforced concrete and steel. And the the development of the steel frame skyscraper, and that enables this fantastic movement in New York City, beginning in New York City, to produce buildings of previously unimaginable height. And you get the Woolworth building, which is,
Yeah,
a
yeah,
quarter of a
Flat
mile high
iron.
or something.
So,
yeah. Well, I was
And
gonna say another interesting thing, Jim. Sorry to, I've been autistic about skyscrapers my whole life. A crazy thing that happened is when it moved from the load-bearing structures of just thicker walls at the bottom, the most expensive apartments were on the first floor because only peasants had to use stairs. And
well,
then it flipped.
yeah.
Didn't that
It's
flip with the Otis? Well, the
sort of, but
skyscraper and
not.
then the Otis elevator.
Yeah, it's sort of, but not quite. What you see in a place like Paris, actually, very clearly. London and Paris are very different because London is mostly composed of row houses and Paris is composed mostly of apartment buildings. And in Paris, especially in the Haussmann period where they rehabilitated or renovated Paris in between 1848 and 1870, you get the wealthy people living on like the second and third floors, not the ground floor, because the
Yeah,
ground
above
floor is
this.
reserved for commerce. And that's one of the reasons that Paris, for me, is much more satisfying city than London, because Paris is vertically integrated with the poorer people on the upper stories because they have to climb 5, 6, 7 stories to get up to their home, and the wealthy people living on really the third floor was the best one because the mezzanine floor above the store was used for storage for the store. So now that's how that shook out. But you're right. You're quite correct. The elevator also changed that. The the problem with big tall office buildings before the steel skeleton skyscraper was that, as you say, the walls had to be really, really thick on the bottom, and started to become a problem. It was evident, I think, I think it was Louis Sullivan, the architect in Chicago,
That's
and
where it started. Yeah.
his auditorium building, which was this giant. I don't remember how many stories it was. Just for the sake of argument, let's say it was 10, 12 stories high. I don't remember, but there was so much weight in the masonry.
It turns pyramidal almost.
Yeah, that they have to have fantastically thick walls on the bottom, and then the building doesn't taper visibly, but
Yeah, it's
the
of
amount
floor
of
space. Yeah.
thickness of the walls tapers. The Romans understood this when they built the Pantheon, and the Romans innovated this thing where the Pantheon has a domed roof, and as the dome goes up, the
It's
cement becomes
thinner.
lighter and lighter and lighter. They were using volcanic tufa, which is a kind of pumice-like
No,
rock,
no.
to make the
Well, and they
concrete.
took the squares out of each section to also thin
Yeah,
out
the coffered
but still had
ceiling.
structural integrity. The last building such built was the Hagia Sophia, and then we seem to have lost all of that capacity for a while.
Yeah, civilizations lose their shit, and
Yeah,
they
we go
say
back to
that
magic. Yeah,
they go back to magic and superstition and beating on each other. And they say that when the Romans left Britain, the Brits sort of forgot how to bathe and gave up on pottery.
I was gonna ask you, and because again, one thing I've always loved is just skyscrapers, and I think Art Deco is the most beautiful, all that shit. But it ultimately comes down to, you could argue maybe they were doing it for beauty back, and I think it's because those were the materials that existed, the like limestone. And um, I've always hated that like the tallest skyscrapers are not in the United States anymore and haven't been for a while. I mean, I went to Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur and then Taipei 101 and then the Burj Dubai, which became, I think, the Burj
believe.
Khalifa, and then that's going to be
I
surpassed.
fucking hate skyscrapers.
I know you do, and I love them, and that is eventually how you and I are going to fight and kill each other. But I was going to say I saw something last night that made me actually think of you in this episode was some companies just using like AI and water jets to carve these beautiful Vatican-esque statues out of marble in like no time, and
Yeah,
and people are like, well, there's no value in that if it's not a real artist. But somebody made a great point as the cost goes down to make this stuff, you might see like a reemergence of these beautiful structures. If it really costs no extra
sure.
money, do you think we'll see that?
Well,
Well,
go ahead, Jim.
yes,
Go ahead.
are you axing me?
Am I asking you a question? I am. I am asking you.
Well, it kind of depends because I think we're also in a very janky period of peak finance and peak financial fuckery.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm not sure that we're going to have the capital and the resources to execute those kinds of stunts
I
anymore.
will say this, though, going back to the past, most people don't realize that most of the great statues and even many of the great paintings weren't actually done by the masters. They were just finished by the masters or guided by. And I look at the technological stuff, I've been in tech for 40 some odd years. Um, I tried sculpting and painting when I was earlier. I was horrible at it and said, well, I'm not going to go try that stuff. Um, when I look today, somebody's coding in to this to the laser guided or water jet guided machine, the proportions and proportionality and the guidance for that. And that's in a way is very similar to the old masters.
Yeah. Well,
Right. And
it's
it
good that
lowers the
there's
cost dramatically. Sorry, Jim, that's
it's a
what I was
good
trying
thing
to
that
get
there's
to. Yeah.
guidance because one of the things that's often the most wrong in execution is the proportioning.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So at least if you have a template for that, you know, in early American architecture, there was a character named Benjamin. That was his last name, and he produced the American Builder's Companion. I forget his first name.
Mhm.
And the American Builder's Companion gave a whole, you know, system of proportioning for carpenters who didn't really have much education to understand how to execute neoclassical
Uh,
details, like, how to do the cornices and how to do the columns
yeah.
correctly and how to space things. And
It's always been this way. It's always been a master and many apprentices, and that's what kept the costs down. One allowed for the productive output volumes, and then the other piece kept the costs down.
yeah,
And
well,
so,
I
Jim,
can,
Yeah, go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, I see, a mix of the two conversations, right? Tommy, of your point, and Jim, yours is that, yes, I think we have just about, we're not quite there, reached peak financialist, you know, fuckery and belief in wealth as a god. As things begin to decay, and you can see this in Rome, you can see it in Paris, you can see it in other great cities, you can see it in Beijing. As societies begin to collapse, beauty starts to emerge as a way for them to, the elites to compensate and provide these visual cues that we're still great. And how do they do that? Well, they do it through how can we get these beautiful things out there, promote certain mass, so many times the golden age of a people is at the end of their run. It's not at the beginning, it's not in the middle, it's somewhere towards the end, and it's their way to try and say we're still great. Well, they got to do that cost effectively, Jim, to your point, and then Tommy, to your point. Well, we have these machine capabilities now that could dramatically lower the cost. And we do, strangely enough, still have some masters around in proportion and proportionality and
Sure.
texture. And, Jim, you're a writer. It's the same there, like going back, Donnie, to World War One, you know, I studied the arts, music, literature, particularly in some of the painting stuff around World War One when I was doing my degree studies, my undergraduate studies. And you could see dramatically the change in literature. Specifically, I'll focus on that, as a writer, nowhere near as successful as you, but, as a writer, there are still, we went from these very rich, very, you know, um, Byron and Tennyson and Shakespeare kind of depth and richness to language to this very short, we end up with Hemingway in, 20, 30 years, who I love, by the way, right? I'm a big fan of Hemingway, but you wind up with these little short staccato, not very, there's no layers, you're just getting what you're getting. And we lost that depth. However, at the same time, we're 100 years on, and there are still some few people, and I don't mean Jean-Paul Sartre and these other fucks who write these complicated sentences that don't mean a damn thing, and you really wonder what the hell they're saying. But there are still some few masters around. The question becomes one of do they have the patrons like they've had in previous epochs, where some of the greatest arts have come out of, and which again tend to be the golden ages, which also tend to be at the decline side, or if not right before the final end, like the Hellenistic period. golden age of the Hellenistic period came right towards the end.
Yeah.
Same with Rome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you see what you're talking about. You see illustrated in things like the amazing amount of Rococo uh, filigree that Donald Trump is putting on the
Yeah,
mantelpiece of the White House.
yeah, yeah.
And I have to say that I'm a Trump voter,
Mm.
basically because
But not for his artistic preferences.
I don't like his I don't like the opposition party.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
Trump is doing exactly what you say. He's going absolutely over the top with
yeah,
this Rococo decoration, and it's all either real gold or pretending to be gold. It can't be real gold. I mean,
yeah,
someone
yeah,
even in the White House, someone would steal it. But
yeah.
yeah, it's pretty
To
wild.
pay for their Coke. Yeah, to pay for their
As for
cocaine.
literature,
Touche.
as for literature, we're in a kind of well, all the narrative arts, we're in a really peculiar situation because it seems, the novel was the one of the great art forms of the 20th century, as was the motion picture, the dramatic motion picture. And both of them are kind of, struggling now to stay alive. And Hollywood has just absolutely lost its ability to
They
produce
paint over.
to produce a coherent story. And the literature that's coming out of American publishing is mostly garbage.
So
And fewer and fewer people have the patience to read it, so.
yeah, I want to defer to Donnie because he
Yeah.
comes out of Hollywood and all of that. I will say this though, I think
Uh-oh.
those things are linked, right? Great writers and great movies, you have to have the pair, right? You have to have both of those. With respect to the richness of language and comprehension, the younger or to novels, the greatest novels ever written were all released as serials. They weren't written as a single book, right? They were released as serials in magazines and newspapers, and
A lot
that's
of
how
them
they worked.
anyway.
A
Yeah, a
lot
lot
of
of
them,
them.
yeah, and some of the greatest literature works. And so, even in their own time, people weren't devouring a 300-page book; they were devouring 4 or 5 pages at a time. But
Yeah, it was like watching The Sopranos only in a broadsheet.
exactly, exactly, yeah. So I'll defer to Donnie on the Hollywood conversation.
Yeah, it's so Jim, I was an armor and a prop master in Hollywood for a long time. It's the family business. Grandpa started in the 40s. So born and raised in LA, and had kind of my career was I lived the blow off top of Hollywood, and
And
did
when would you say that was exactly?
well, I like for my own story, probably starting in 2004, that was Mr. and Mrs. Smith for me, which was just the most over the top, ridiculous action movie that had ever been made. There's 87 deleted scenes. No one will ever know how much it cost. The
They're
whole
cute
brand.
though.
Yeah, no, they ended up making a good movie, but like did that movie filmed for over 3 years. There are people
Whoa.
who worked for a year of their life on that movie who, when they saw the final cut, didn't recognize anything they saw because there's different beginnings, there's different endings, there's different villains. So it was kind of this just ridiculous, Cleopatra-esque, exercise in fame and money and whatever it was. And then, I think it went from there until 2018, 2019, and it just never recovered from COVID and the strike and woke and Me Too. All of those, I think all of those things played a very major part. Um, and then, yeah, I have to wonder how much of the budgets of the films I worked on came from USAID or some other, how much of what I was involved in really wasn't a commercial enterprise and
Mm.
was actually something very different. I wonder. So,
Hollywood,
Are
yeah.
you out
Hollywood
of there?
was
I mean, for all intents and purposes, yeah, because there's no there anymore. They are still making some TV shows, but in terms of action movies, they're not making a single movie in the continental United States right now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
Are you still in the movie business?
not really. I'm basically out.
Mm.
Yeah,
We have
and
to we have to remember that Hollywood itself was created by Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel to both launder money and to whitewash the mob and the mob's what was becoming the mob state. And then the agency, which is the instantiation of the mob state, got in there and around World War II to do propaganda. Before World War II and World War II actually to do propaganda movies, etc. And it's been the same ever since.
Well, I don't know. They did produce quite a number of decent movies, for all that. There are a lot of good motion picture art came out of Hollywood in,
Oh
a
yeah,
hundred
oh
years.
yeah. Well, CIA does some good work sometimes.
and you always have to wonder how much of that was accidental. Like I will tell you that I worked on movies that in the midst of it, everyone thought we like on Flags of Our Fathers, we all thought we were making the Pacific Theater version of Saving Private Ryan. And that's not what it was, right? Clint was making an exploitation movie and it was good, but it wasn't what any of us thought it was. And working on the 40-Year-Old Virgin, we all thought that we were working on the most ridiculous, stupid, childish comedy. Everyone just wanted to get out of there and go do something else. And it ended up launching like an entire 20-year span of comedies, and actors.
Yeah.
So people don't know going in what's going to work and what doesn't. And you can have the grandest of plans and expectations, and sometimes it hits and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
I feel like such a lowbrow idiot, and I'm such an egotistical asshole who prides myself on like reading and fucking getting into med school. But man, my favorite movie is still just Anchorman. It still hits.
Good.
It's I don't know what it is about it. Not that had not. Oh, I was going to bring up another point. So, somebody actually I saw it on Twitter, and which was probably horseshit, but it was kind of about where the densest or I guess the most fertile soil across the world, and its proximity to the surface, not just density of nutrition and blah blah blah, and they just chose the map of the state of Georgia just for an example, and it was just a band of like wherever it's better soil there, and it was from like 1,000,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, 10,000, 1,000, and it's just overlaying everything. And it's not just like trees and flora and fauna. It's also like where slavery was, which you could imagine is from plantations. But then it's also where like certain colleges arose that created certain above average and whatever a specific field, and how they vote, and even up till 2025, it's like a very unique, I don't know, consumption of internet and kilowatts. And it made me start to think, how much of this really is, oh, well, we're the water molecules and we wave. And it's like, no, you're just a part of the ocean where the water's crashing. It's not necessarily you, it's a deeper thing. I was going to ask you, Jim, do you think that also can kind of manifest with, if you were to overlay things, would you be able to, do you think architecture would latch on to that? Or what you talked about, I think the first episode you and I did 4 years ago, about sort of the urban sprawl in suburbia, is that, and do you think that is overlaid onto something much deeper, not just, a post World War II boom and, American sort of excess?
Well, I don't know. You'd have to imagine that it, one way or another, includes all the layers of culture that preceded it for 10,000 years in
Yeah.
one way or another.
Yeah.
But I think it's also much more of a kind of epiphenomenal matter of, it's a transient, anomalous manifestation of certain conditions that came along and that, melded to produce this, what ends up being entropy made visible, which is how I like to describe suburban sprawl.
Dissipative structures.
Yeah, it is the most it's the most colossal dissipative structure that the human race has devised, and that's
Yeah.
another reason why I like to call it the greatest misallocation of resources in the history of the world. And
Yeah.
but that's kind of a totalistic view of it, not necessarily a view of the cultural layering that went into it. In the United States, certainly it had to do with certain simple and easily understood things like this is a large continental nation with a lot of available real estate. And, at the very time that you get the invention of the motor car, it enables tremendous profit opportunities for developing the outlands of the cities. As I said earlier, the cities by 1900 or 1920, let's say, more precisely, had become, pretty awful places. Or, unless you were really rich. They're probably great if you were a Vanderbilt or a Whitney or something, but they've become pretty unpleasant places to live. And so you get this prompting to move to the outlands. And that's accompanied by the cultural layering of the frontier experience, where Americans are constantly challenged to occupy new lands. So you get the new lands outside of Chicago, or the new lands outside of New York City, or even Atlanta. And the first suburbanites become the pioneers out there. And the American home is kind of a cartoon version of a little homestead in the woods, or a little homestead on the prairie, and
So,
and and what happens is it becomes ever more of a cartoon. Really, what happens after World War
yeah,
II
yeah.
is that there's a TV show that comes on in the early 1950s called The Honeymooners with Jackie Gleason. And it depicts this couple and their friends who are living in a tenement building in New York City after the Second World War. And it's the most miserable, bleak apartment you can imagine. And, America, that represented what America was running away from in 1953, out to Levittown and other new suburbs. They didn't want to live in Ralph Cramden's apartment.
Yeah.
And,
So
yeah.
historically, Tommy, to what you were saying, and then Jim, to tie it back to you, and maybe Donnie to bring it back to the death of Hollywood. Historically, where humans went to establish their habitation was where life grew the richest, where life was the most successful. And one of the things that we find there in those types of soils, like the Ukraine, the black soils of Ukraine and the black soils of the Hudson Valley and upstate New York and elsewhere, is these the out here in the West, particularly the Pacific Northwest where I live, these rich old growth forests, is that there are these very strong, healthy mycelial networks in the soil. And well, turns out that's where plants and animals that live off the plants thrive the most, and that's where we went. And there's usually, corresponding regular water flows and healthy water and all that as well. But what happens after, in the 1920s, all the way up into the 70s and 80s, and even today in some places, like I have a friend of mine who's a builder down in Texas, and they're building out in the desert. There's no mycelial network out there. There's just shrub, sparse scrub and snakes and,
Tarantulas.
nothing. Right. And so, one of the things is that the financialists only care about money. They don't care about life. They care about profits. So whereas we used to flow where life was the most successful and then embed ourselves into that part of the world and our own lives thrive, we started in, as Jim, as you're saying, in the 1920s, 30s, but really taking off after World War II with the VA loans in particular. And and then Vietnam as well. And we started just building out these lifeless, devoid communities. And if you watch the entertainment, the arc of the arts as well at the time, it also becomes less devoid of life.
Interesting.
So there's millions of years that humans followed the path of life because that's where you went to survive. But, once we went to this purely financialist system and we could just buy anything or we could fake it, life started to bleed out of everything until now we're just mostly devoid of life and living in this connection.
That really explains Las Vegas, which is kind of the
Purely
worst
parasitic.
the worst manifestation of crap arising out of nothing
Yes.
in the most transient possible sense.
I think
Yeah, and I think terribly sorry. I think the transients going back to the World Expos, I think the transients started there because they built these, and I say this for my beloved San Francisco, they built these incredible cities that were all intended from the very beginning to be torn down and disposed of.
Well, they were made out of largely out of chicken
Paper
wire
mache
and plaster.
and yeah.
Guys,
Yeah.
they were movie sets.
Yeah.
Yes.
They only had to
Yes.
survive the show.
Yeah.
There-
Instead of actually rebuilding the city that was in. Yeah, terribly sorry, Charlie.
No, it's I was gonna say I've never been to Vegas. I have no intention of ever going. There is something
I
I
lived
do
there
love.
for a while.
There is something I just do love about it because it's just such. It's just what it is. It's the fucking like it's just the gold clad, sparkling, just like
It's not
trash.
gold clad, it's like tin foil
By
clad.
my mean, I know,
Yeah.
but that's what I mean. Is like there is something so it's just so ostentatious, and it would be gross no matter where it is. But there's something better about that. It's in the middle of fucking nowhere. It's just like it's the
Also,
gaudiness of running an air conditioner
also
in an
created by
open.
Meyer Lansky
Yeah.
and Bugsy Siegel.
Yeah, no, don't
Same
need to
guys that
launder
created
money and shit.
Hollywood.
But it's still
Yeah.
there's just something so funny. I don't know why.
And the Teamsters Union.
Yeah,
And the teams,
it's
right?
I wrote a chapter about Las Vegas in a book of mine from 2004. The book was called The City in Mind. And it was just a bunch of essays about, Berlin, Mexico City, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah.
And
And
so the title of the Las Vegas chapter was Utopia of Clowns.
there's something so cool, and I think Garrett Graff talks about it in his book Raven Rock. It might have been then, but there is just I love the imagery of just like there was for a time where you could kind of get like unofficial schedules if you had one of, like the higher up, I guess, patio hotels or something, to where you could go and it's forever away, but you could actually see the flashes of nuclear testing, and people would like they'd make whole things around it where they'd stay up all night just doing coke and drinking and because they knew it was going to happen at like 4:30 a.m. and there's just something so like comically like stereotypical like Fallout. They're there with the giant fucking Cadillacs in there, and they're all out there just smoking and like Norman Rockwell shit and just watching like nuclear flashes go off. That I'm like,
That's
you couldn't that if that was a movie, you'd say it's too over the top.
Tommy, you just articulated peak America.
And that's what I mean. Like
Right? I've
that's
never
what,
heard a better expression of peak America.
just fucking Norman Rockwell, slicked back hair, just
Hooker, cocaine,
listening to
Cadillacs,
Buddy
and
Holly
nukes.
and like watching nukes go off. And it's just like, God, what I would fucking give for that. I just love that. It's just so over the top. I had nowhere to go with that. I just wanted to tell you.
No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. No, Jim, I think this and I do believe, and Donnie, this gets back to what started this dialogue. I do believe that what happened in the trenches of World War I is we lost our humanity, and we lost our deep, deep 1,000-year-on plus connection to the soil, the land, to life, and the living.
Yeah, it was deeply demoralizing for Western cities.
Yes. Well, we
And
lost any claim to moral to moral rightness. We lost any claim to actual civilization, as we understood it.
yeah, and one of the more peculiar aspects of that is how baffling it has been to historians for the last 100 years about how that thing even started and why they got into it. And
Well, it was to break up. It was also to break up organic status hierarchy. It was to end monarchy. That's what the whole purpose was, because the
well,
hereditary princes and the nobility stood in the way of the financialists buying everything and everyone.
uh-huh. I could see an argument for that, sure. Although it's really hidden.
Well, it's coming out more and more that how this was all set up in the late 1800s with the Crimean War and other things. But I've written on this extensively about the financialist kill chain and how this goes back through, Wall Street, City of London, Amsterdam, Venice, back to Rome, and they've just been repeating this pattern. And
Yeah.
what stands in there, what has been, and Michael Hudson, brilliant Michael Hudson, writes about this extensively. The only thing and this gets back to the whole conversation, the only thing historically that has ever stood in the way of the oligarchs and total financial enslavement fuckery is a strong hereditary nobility that can say no and can stand with their people against other forces that are sent in internally and externally to kill them and destroy them and steal their land and financialize it. Now we're tokenizing everything. It's the same thing. And what stood in the way of the final total great theft of the commons and the theft of, the financialization of life and the living were the hereditary principalities, because they technically, formally owned the land and the production of the land. And so they had World War One. If you look at World War One, what did it do? It ended empires. Well, it ended kingdoms. But what it did is it wiped out virtually all of the nobility, the strong, capable nobility across all of Europe and the United Kingdom. Some of those families were 1,000 years old with these unreal relationships and connections and obligations and knowledge and understanding, et cetera. It wiped them out. They're gone.
Well,
Never coming back.
interestingly now, one of the characters who's in the arena of public debate, this is a very, very raucous arena with, thousands of voices vying for attention, is Curtis Yarvin, who kind of styles himself as a monarchist, and for some of the reasons that you just described, that otherwise the civilization needs a kind of a governor in the mechanical sense, let's say, a heavy force that regulates the movements of things.
Yes. Yeah, maintains the bounds.
Mm-hmm.
You can fuck around all you want, but within these bounds, we get outside these bounds, we lose our anchoring to life and to reality.
So, we're in the strange situation where we're coming out of this 80-year period of the hyper modern, where we enjoyed the delusion that we'd overcome all of the problems of yesteryear.
Yeah, we conquered. How do you think that ties in? How do you think that ties into the fact, didn't the White House say yesterday they're not releasing like unemployment numbers as well as GDP numbers? How does it?
I missed that.
That's kind of concerning.
A little bit.
If it's real, yeah, I don't know. Why, was there any explanation for that?
Oh, I would imagine it's because it's not too great. Why do you not show your
Well,
parents
sure,
your work
but
hard?
did they explain, have a public
I don't know. I'll look it up. Did you see that, Ian?
rationale?
No, I didn't. But, I've written on this as well. We've been in economic depression formally since 11, 12. We've been in recession, long running recession since 2000, 2001. All we've done is we've just papered over, we've actually quite literally just changed the variables in the equation to ensure that we get the output from the equation that we want.
Yeah, understating inflation by a few percentage points over long periods of time ends up having really profound effects on how you view everything.
Yeah. Well, and how does the culture of architecture express that now in the moment that we're in? And what we seem to be watching is just very much like what you see coming out of Hollywood in the last 2 decades. It's just endless recycling of old ideas. In this case, it's in architecture, it's paradoxically the recycling of the idea of novelty. So in other words, they keep on coming up with a new, but it's the same old bullshit of, either, things that are tilted at angles that disturb your neurology, or, strange termite-like forms. And, as long as it's never been seen before. And it must be a very strange thing to be in academic architecture right now, where, that you've basically got a system that is training young people to be supernatural wizards, who create forms that have never been seen before for their own sake. And what you end up with, of course, is a completely incoherent building culture where nothing is recognizable and nothing is typologically identifiable.
I think people go, if we look, people tend to go back of their own volition when things have reached, gone far beyond their peak. They tend to go back. Our ancestors, not so very long ago, didn't want novelty. They wanted something like their neighbors, but they wanted it to last. Their
Yeah.
novelty was that their house outlasted their neighbor's house by 100 years or 200 years, right?
Yeah.
That they were able to sustain longer. So this
Now,
hyper financialization is what's led to all of this, this dopamine rushing
Well,
living.
hold on, let Donnie jump in here. Donnie has a point.
Jim, this is something that I think I originally heard from you. You were talking about how journalism used to be a very blue collar profession and how over time it became a very white collar profession.
yeah,
And
a
then,
lot of people have been saying this, not me.
okay. Well, I think
But
maybe
it's
it was a
true.
podcast of yours where that first came up. And then, something very similar has happened in publishing, where now it is full, when you had to make a blue collar living in journalism or publishing, it had a very particular type of character. And now, if you want to be in publishing, you need to be an intern for 3 years and be able to work with no money, which means you need to come from a richer family and have, a very different socioeconomic background. And the same thing happened in film. Where all of these film was absolutely 100% a blue collar profession for almost its entire history until very, very recently. And I call it the tool belt problem because I grew up on film sets. And, when I was a little Donnie, you're at tool belt level. And as you walk around the lots, almost everyone had a tool belt on because you're building sets. You're actually working and building things. And when you go onto a lot now, everyone's in a suit. And so EM to your point, as as financialization increases, so does kind of this idea of we keep on creating elites, right? We keep on mass producing college graduates. Well, they have to go somewhere. Well, where are they going? They're going into all of these formerly blue collar, industries and professions. And Jim, I wonder if what you just described with architecture is the same thing. Like, I have to imagine that once upon a time, an architect spent a lot of time on a job site, right, and understood some aspect of building and building technology. And I wonder if they do anymore, right? Is it now? Do they never leave the office?
Yeah,
You
plus
know,
they have computer assistants for all the hard stuff.
Well, they hand it all
Basically,
off to the engineers as well.
yeah,
Most, yeah,
well, and the engineers, use the computers and
yeah,
CAD,
exactly. Yeah.
computer-aided design to do all the measuring and proportioning and figure out all the hard stuff that used to have to be done with, math. And yeah, Peter Turchin, who's a kind of a political cultural writer, calls this elite overproduction. So, so now all of the graduates of Brown University are infesting all of the cultural institutions, and
Well,
most of them turn out to be 23-year-old lesbians, who have a bad attitude about the world.
I
yeah,
think they can out.
there was a
Go
great
ahead.
documentary I saw a little while ago. It was on the last day that the New York Times was published on lead printing press. So,
Yeah.
like, the last day that paper was mechanically printed before it went electronic. And it's I think late 70s, early 80s. It looks like it's out of a Beastie Boys music video. Everyone's got short, ties, short sleeve shirts, mustaches. And it is, I mean, they're pouring molten lead to make these plates, and the reporters are down in the room looking at the typeset to make sure that everything is right, and just everyone involved is deep into the mechanics
That's awesome.
of this process. And now it's a bunch of people in a room typing on a computer.
I can tell you how this happened firsthand. And how, it illustrates the diminishing returns of technology. Because when I first got a job on a daily in 1973 in Albany, New York, which was the evening paper for the state capital, and it was a substantial newspaper, but not a great newspaper. Okay. And I was fascinated by the linotype machines in the basement. And this was something that looked like it had a typewriter keyboard, but it was the size of a pipe organ. And it's this giant machine about, 15 feet high. And at the center of this machine was a little crucible with melted lead. And every time the operator punched a key, it would pour a little thing into a type thing and form, a word or a paragraph. It was just fascinating to watch. Anyway, at that time, they were just beginning to introduce computer typesetting. And I was a reporter, and we had, here's how it worked. We had a special IBM Selectric typewriter that had a type ball that had about 11 spare hieroglyphic kind of figures. And when you typed one of those figures, it would, we typed on a piece of white paper that had red borders on it for the scanner to be read by the scanner. And when you typed one of these hieroglyphs, it instructed the scanner to indent or italicize or new paragraph or something. There were very few of these things, but the union copy editors on the paper didn't want to learn how to use it, and they started a big fight over having to learn how to use this. And it was kind of, in league with the printers union. They were all starting a skirmish to battle this new technology. And the upshot of it was that a lot of stuff didn't get read by the copy editors. And the publisher was living in fear that somebody like me would write a story that would say something like Governor Malcolm Wilson was found in a motel with a goat. And, I was in exactly that kind of prankish situation because they made me a columnist. It was, I was like 24 years old, 25 years old, and they made me a columnist, and I think very recklessly because I could write about anything, and I did. And so the publisher lived in terror for about 2 years until they straightened out the copy desk and got him to actually edit stuff again.
That's so
Golden
cool.
years.
I was gonna say that's so cool, the dumping of the molten lead. Yeah, I watched a documentary like last fall, maybe I don't know, 2 years ago, but it was just I was just skimming through parts of it, and it was just something so interesting about like regardless of what even the point was, and it was just but I think it was from like the 70s, and it was just this like reporter of kind of like Donnie said, just giant ass mustache and just like gross suit, and he's just walking around, he's just talking to the guys building the World Trade Center, and there's just there's sparks flying and shit, and all these guys they're just drinking beer and shit, and if there's something so you just watching it and they're going around talking about payment, and it's just like it's talking to these guys like, yeah, these guys will come up and do this job and do this shit. And like, if you just need adequate pay, it's going back and forth. And I think even Nixon commented on it. And it really does. You're looking at it and it's an alien world. You're looking at it and none of that shit is present. It's
I've written on this in this our English, not so long ago in our lifetimes, and I'm not terribly old. I'm getting there, but I'm not terribly old. But in our own lifetimes, virtually everything that was done that was real was done by pub brawlers.
yeah. Yeah.
Hey, EM, here's a question for you.
Yes, sir.
How did all those 23-year-old lesbians coming out of Brown University from wealthy families who pay for their apartment, how did they all become Marxists?
Wealthy
Estrogen.
families paid for their apartments and
Estrogen.
they're not tethered to reality, and
Women are,
and the profit
estrogen
motive.
is naturally socialistic
Mhm.
because women are oriented to the smaller scale, trying to figure out how everybody gets a piece.
An agreement, I guess, agreement.
And consensus, because that's what you need for everybody to get
Yeah.
to get a piece. But that doesn't work in complex, abstract, and large, So when it comes to large volumes of complexity, where there's a vast amount of interdependencies, and most of those interdependencies are not social related, they're hard constraints, that estrogen-based everybody gets a piece doesn't work.
Yeah.
But
Well, we're really in an
design-
unfortunate place now in our culture, in our estrogen-saturated culture.
Well, absolutely, and a lot of this has to do with the birth control pill because the estrogen, aerosolized estrogen is what regulates male testosterone
That's
heavily. It's the
Uh-huh.
aerosolized estrogen. And so all these women on the pill, people are talking about gaying the frogs. Oh, the real problem is that the collapse in male testosterone levels is directly correlated with the amount of the pill that women are taking and how much they're aerosolizing that. Why? Because all of the males are walking around physiologically thinking the women are pregnant.
What an idea.
And when a woman is pregnant, two things: men down regulate their testosterone naturally down regulates, so they're less aggressive, et cetera, more agreeable. It's because of the child, et cetera. The other thing is the male will put up with the woman's bullshit because women are crazy when they're pregnant.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
wired for it.
They're crazy enough when they're not.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. They're erratic. Let's be kind. Women are erratic when they're not pregnant. They can go, yeah. God bless them for it too, right? This isn't picking on women, but
Yeah, Ian, there's another interesting corollary to that, which is that women who are on the pill tend to be attracted to a different type of male versus when they're not. So a woman who's been on the pill since she was in high school meets a guy in college, gets married, says, "I want to have a kid," gets off the pill, and all of a sudden, why the hell am I with you? It's a complete hormonal shift.
Why, was he a beta boy or something?
Exactly. Yeah. Women, because the pill makes you think you're pregnant, right? And so in that condition, you want
a provider.
You want more of a provider. You want more steady. Yeah, you more stability. And then you get off the pill, and it's like, I want to date the football captain again.
Yeah. They want warriors.
Yeah. And so that's behind a huge amount of the divorce numbers.
And Donnie, you're absolutely right. Back to again, we used to be pub brawlers.
Yeah.
Not pudge boys. We used to be pub brawlers. The girls were attracted to. Why? Because we weren't putting girls at 14 years of age on the pill.
Well,
we weren't putting it and keeping them on there until they're in their 30s and then way past their fertility window, which is a whole nother issue.
I have noticed that there's a correlation between that and most of our politics having devolved to psychodrama, which is the favorite milieu of females.
Yeah, gentlemen, I'm terribly sorry. I'm going to have to jump, but I want to tie this back, this female thing, etc. One of the things that I think's been happening, and I'm terribly sorry, I got to jump. One of the things that I think is happening at a very fundamental level is that women actually are the ones who bore the burden of World War I and World War II in the terms of it was their children, their sons, their husbands, their fathers, their uncles, their brothers that were killed in vast numbers. And women have steadily, increasingly been trying to take over and take control because they don't want to go back to that kind of bloodbath. So with that, I'm going to step out, guys. Terribly sorry. Thank you very much. Okay. Pleasure to meet you, Jim.
A pleasure.
Yeah.
And I'll put you guys in touch on email after this. Yeah, no, it's a fucking wild stance. But if we can wrap up in like the next couple minutes, I do have another show I have to get to, or we can hop off now. But yeah, Donnie.
No, Jim, it was a pleasure talking to you. I've been following your work for a long time. I've read a lot of your novels.
Hey, read the new one.
I will. I'll read the new one.
Look, I'm Gone. It's the debut of J.D. Salinger as a character in American literature.
Okay, I will. Cool.
Fuck yeah. And Jim, I will see you tomorrow.
I will. See you tomorrow with the three bald ones.
The bald ones, Thanksgiving cast. But
Joe.
Donnie, Jim, thank you.
Hey, wait a
so
minute,
much.
Tommy.
Yeah.
I have to record my own podcast at 11 just before yours.
Yeah.
And I only go an hour, so I should, I might be a minute or two late.
Yeah, dude, you're good.
Popping in.
Yeah, you're good.
So Donnie.
Yeah.
A pleasure to meet you. Good luck in what you've shifted onto. What have you shifted onto out of Hollywood?
EM and I actually have a little project we're working on. We're trying to do some alternative storytelling using AI to generate stories and images based around some novels he's written.
Hey, make a movie out of Look, I'm Gone.
You might be able to do it yourself. It's the tools are surprisingly powerful and surprisingly stupid at the same time.
Yeah.
Trying to make it work. But, I think that might be one of the things that breaks Hollywood's stranglehold is that storytellers can start telling their own telling their own stories, with AI tools. And the question is, how do we do it? Because I
Yeah.
don't think it's using AI to create a 2 hour movie. I think it's using AI to do something different, and that's what we're trying to figure out.
Wow, that's a conundrum. I'll be
It
very
is.
interested how that works out. Well, conveniently, I have a phone call.
All right,
There it
Jim,
is. Bye,
Donnie,
Tommy.
guys,
Bye-bye,
thank you so
everybody.
much for this. And yeah, I'll send you guys when it's up. Thank you so much. Hey guys, real quick, you guys know Basil Baz, ARC, the Association for the Recovery of Children. I just did a fundraiser with them the other day, and I'm going to put this on to every episode I do. They are special forces veterans who physically rescue trafficked children. They have since 1993. They have a 100% success rate. They do not take salaries. They all have day jobs, and they literally rescue sex trafficked children. Donations to them are a tax write-off. I get nothing from them, and they have not asked me to put this on. I've included this little clip on episodes for the last year or so, and I'm just re-recording it because I just got to meet him just 2 days ago for future. It's November 25th, 2025, but this will be on every episode now for the next year. And there is nothing better you can do with your money. Um, if you can support them for even $5, please do that. It is, they truly are doing the Lord's work, and I think we all have an obligation to do that. Thank you so much.
Higher ultraviolet exposure is associated with lower mortality. The United Kingdom is a high latitude and low sunlight country. Researchers there collected data on over 360,000 participants in a study of UV exposure via solarium use. When compared with non-users, solarium users had 15% risk lowered of all-cause mortality, 23% lower risk of cardiovascular mortality, 14% lower risk of cancer mortality, and a 12% lower risk of non-cardiovascular, non-cancer mortality. In other words, all other causes. Quoting the researchers, our study adds to the growing evidence that the benefits of UV exposure outweigh the risks in low sunlight environments. A link to the original publication is available in the box below the video. Get some UV light this winter. Immerse yourself in the tranquility of the blue. Visit a Blue Room soon. www.blueroom.com.
Hey guys, a huge sponsor of the show is Heaven's Harvest Prepper Food. Clayton lives down in Georgia. He's been on the show before. It's actually nearby where I went to college. They are a huge sponsor of the show. They give me some money every month, even when I don't sell enough to warrant that paycheck. Meaning that the show is not free. It's just that it's free for you. If you guys need prepper food, or if you're just interested in supporting the show, I'd please ask you to go to the link in the description. Go to Heaven's Harvest Prepper Food, promo code TPC for 10% off. 72 servings per pail, 25-year shelf life. These things are, they double as dumbbells. Pasta Primavera, cheesy potato soup, mac and cheese, loaded baked potato casserole, chili mac, cheddar broccoli soup, cheesy lasagna, teriyaki rice. You can get banana chips. There's also raspberries, strawberries, and apples. There's a bunch of freeze-dried fruit, or you can even get seeds to plant your own garden. It's not a bad thing to have. It's like gold or ammunition. It's a good thing to have. It's a bad thing if you have to use it, but it's good. It's good to have it, not need it, than need it, not have it. So that's what I'd say. And if you just want to support the show, please go to the link in the description. Please go support them because they support me. Thank you so much, guys.